All right, guys, this is Mark from the Basketball Doctors, and we have a special guest today. We have Jess, sports dietitian, and I'll go ahead and introduce yourself, Jess. Thanks for hopping on.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. My name is Jessica Isaacs. I'm a sports dietitian. I've been working in the world of basketball for, maybe close to 10 years now. Started off at MAMBA Sports Academy, Kobe's spot, working as a kind of a private practice dietitian there, working with athletes of all levels, helping them one-on-one coaching kind of thing. And then moved on to UCLA, where I was the men's and women's teams basketball sports dietitian, actually the first collegiate basketball specific dietitian in the country at the time. We've grown a lot, which is great. It's great to see basketball is taking nutrition a little bit more seriously now, but I think we have a long way to go still. From there, I spent a couple seasons with the Clippers as their team dietitian, working with all of the guys, pro guys, the main guys, and then also, incoming draft kids, G League, two-way guys. And then now I'm at USC, where I work with the basketball teams as well as the volleyball teams.
All right, fight on. All right, fellow USC alumni.
Let's go.
So Jess, I want to kind of start off with, we'll just jump into some myths. What are some of the craziest things you've heard, or things that you're come on, this is so outdated, or I can't believe you guys still follow this. Can you give me just some couple ones specific for basketball? Because you worked with a lot of basketball, so you probably heard some crazy ones, but can you give me a couple?
Yeah, no, it's funny. I just posted a post yesterday about telling me your most unhinged nutrition advice, and the comments are insanity. But a big one I think is sugar. Athletes shouldn't eat sugar. I think there's a lot of common misconceptions. There's different types of sugar. There's natural sugar. There's added sugars. I can argue that either one of them have a purpose and have a role in an athlete's diet, just looking at timing and the amount and that sort of thing. But really, our body, your energy runs on carbohydrates, which is glucose, which is sugar, that can come in many different forms. But when we're active and we're practicing or playing games, our bodies want the simplest form of sugar that can come from fruit, or it can come from a packaged snack with added sugar, and that serves a purpose. It's not going to be detrimental to the athlete's health. If we're snacking all the time on quote unquote junk food, then maybe some concerns there. But that's a big one, is just not understanding how important carbohydrates are for an athlete, especially a basketball athlete. If you're playing 2 days, tournaments especially, carbs are king. We need those. If you ever start feeling shaky, or you've hit a wall and you can't go on, you're probably out of carbs or out of sugar. So that's a big one. And then I did a presentation today, and one of the things that comes up often is your pee should be clear, which I would actually love for more of my athletes' pee to be clear, because more of it looks more like apple juice, and a lot of them end up pretty dehydrated and not super hydrated. But your urine should be a light yellow color. So if it's clear, we probably don't have enough electrolytes, or we're chugging too much water too quickly. But then on electrolytes, a lot of my athletes will think, hey, I just need electrolytes and I can get away with not drinking fluids if I just drink a lot of electrolytes. And that's not the case either. It's all about a balance of all the things.
Yeah, that's actually pretty interesting, because I remember when I was at USC, it was pee like a champion or something, and they had different colorways. So you're saying that the more clear, because I think this is a common misconception. Everyone's it has to be super clear, but at that point, it's not healthy, right? No, not healthy, but not as great as you would want that, fine balance between the two, right?
Yeah, we should have a little yellow to it. And if you take certain vitamins or minerals, or my athletes take beet shots, that might mess with the color a little bit. But it should be light yellow, like lemonade. If it's clear, it just means we're not absorbing all the fluids that we're outputting. So again, this might be someone who's chugging a bunch of water all at once and then peeing it right out and it's clear, or someone that's drinking 2 gallons of water a day, but they're not only drinking plain water and not getting in electrolytes. They're also maybe cramping because of that. But that just shows me that we don't have enough sodium on board to soak up that fluid, essentially.
Okay. I guess going back to the sugar thing, I guess this is a question, with off-season basketball coming along, there's multiple, tournaments going on, multiple games going on. What's kind of your favorite go-to snack? I know you're talking about sugar, and we want that glucose in order to play in between games, one game versus the other. What's your kind of go-to? What do you guys recommend normally?
Yeah, so it depends on how much time we have. But if it's like under an hour and a half, I want it to be carbohydrates. So if this is something we're eating directly before a practice or a game, or we're eating in between and we only have like 30 to 60 minutes or less, I want to see just carbohydrates. For me, or for someone that doesn't typically eat a bunch, you might want to start more simple. So like I like an applesauce packet. It's already kind of broken down. It's easy to suck down really easily and not necessarily take up a lot of space. A sports drink could also work if you're someone who doesn't eat a lot or not able to eat a lot. But this is also like a banana. This could be a bagel. This could be fruit snacks. It can come in a lot of different forms. And I really just work with athletes on like, what is your appetite, your capacity, and how well do you digest? We want to avoid things that are higher in fat, higher in fiber, and even things too high in protein. Those can take longer to digest. And if you're active, your body's not really putting a lot of blood flow and effort into your digestive system. So that can kind of cause a little bit of a disaster one way or the other if we eat too close to training and the wrong combination of things.
No, for sure. And then I guess my next question is going back onto that tournament. I know, and we kind of talked about this before going on air, but a lot of athletes in the summer are trying to go like 3 a days, like really trying to take advantage of this summer, especially high school kids, and the lower level D2, D3, since they have the summers off. What do you recommend, like meal wise, if someone wants to train first thing in the morning? They're like, hey, I want to train in the morning, give myself time to recover to train again, or what's kind of like, do the same principles apply? Are we trying to have these athletes just take simple sugars if they want to do, like, let's say weight room stuff, like, hey, they got to be there at 5:30. Do they just take simple sugars or bananas? Like, what do you recommend? Still the same concept?
Yeah, well, first of all, 5:30 is rude. But I know for like my athletes, for sure, even at 7 a.m., they're not going to get up 2-3 hours before to have a full meal.
Sure.
It's not going to happen. In a perfect world, sure, but it's not going to happen. And sleep is important. And I would rather that we figure out how to make it work so that we can get the sleep. So I would say, simple sugars. I say 1 gram of carbohydrate for every 1 minute of activity. So lifting is going to be a little less intense. Maybe we can get away with a little less, but certainly like if we're getting shots up, if we're practicing, if we have a game, 1 gram of carb for every 1 minute that you want to be active. And that can be, stuff you have immediately before or throughout. And so I tell my kids to start off with at least 60 grams of carbs, at least 1 hour of energy. So whether we get that in, a couple bananas or a banana and an applesauce and a fruit, whatever combination works, but those simple things. Cereal also works. My athletes will come in a lot of times and do like cereal. Those are usually the go-tos. They're just Nutri-Grain bar, like a granola bar kind of thing, but just making sure we're getting enough and we're having enough of those. Peanut butter and jelly sandwich, Uncrustable, that sort of thing.
Is a bomb.
Yeah, for sure. And then the other thing is, like, if we're training that many times a day, refueling is so critical.
That was my next question. Like, what happens next?
So we use that when we're training. We're using a combination of glucose, which is like the sugar that's available in our blood, and then glycogen, which is our stored carbohydrate in our muscle and our liver. That's like our gas tank. And so our gas tank is going to be depleted if we've trained hard. And then we've probably also used up whatever we ate right before or drank if we had like a sports drink or something with carbs during. And so right after we're done training is prime time where our muscles are primed to kind of soak up those carbohydrates and put it back into the gas tank. So a lot of people will think like in that, they'll say, oh, I got to do in the 45 minutes to an hour after training, I need protein, right?
Yeah, is that true?
Protein's cool, but we need carbs. It's actually, we want a 3-to-1 ratio of carbs to protein. So like, let's say it's 15 grams of protein for that. Then I want, what is that? 45 grams of carbohydrates minimum. Probably want to see even more than that in that hour window to replace. And that refueling is so critical if we're doing multiple back-to-back sessions, or if we have, training late one day and then early in the morning. It's so important that we refuel, or else we're going to start to feel gassed. Our energy levels are going to deplete. We're going to start to feel like low blood sugar, shaky. You're just not going to have as good of a workout or a practice. And so we want to be fueled up so that we're able to output, even if we have some body composition goals, we want to make some changes in this off season. If you're in off season, I still, we want to fuel our body to perform at its best during those critical times. We want it to, do the things we wanted to do. No,
for sure. I guess my next question based on that, what's more important, like the fueling aspect or the refueling? Let's say during this, like, I've been reading research everywhere, I was kind of occasionally, and it's like some people are saying, oh, it's okay if you had food before, but like, what are your thoughts? What do you usually tell people?
Yeah, I mean, I still argue, especially if we're doing 2 days, 3 days, or again, if we have like an evening session and then a morning session, that refuel is important, but that fueling first is important. The fueling first ensures that we're getting something in,
Yeah.
right? So like, I'm gonna say that that's always like a non-negotiable. Like we need to eat something before, we need to, if we're training for longer than 45 minutes, we need to add something in during as well. That can be liquid, that can be a gel, that can be the chew, that can be, it can be anything
Yeah.
that works for us. But again, I would say pre-fueling is top, and then refueling would be a very close second, but also very important if we're doing these back-to-back days or multiple sessions in a day.
No, for sure. And then like you said, I think going back, it's like when, you have the athletes, they only have like 10 minutes to eat, it's better to get even just something simple. It's unrealistic to have, full on eggs and, like full on, but just something simple sugar. I guess, the next, when you're coming refueling, let's say if they only have, let's say they got to go to class or, they're going to drive somewhere, is there, how big of a window would you say for that refueling is, I guess, optimal? I mean, not optimal, but probably best is right after, but, how much of a window do they have, that they could still eat and get those refueling gains that we need?
Yeah, so as far as like that, like prime, like carb uptake window, that's about 45 minutes to an hour. It doesn't have to be complicated though. This could be like chocolate milk. Like it could be something that's simple like that. It doesn't have to, it could be like a little, like I said, a peanut butter and jelly, something like that. Obviously, we want meals in there too. So, if you're going to have a full meal and it's got a good amount of carbohydrates, you're going to have that within that hour, then you don't necessarily need like a separate refueling snack. But if it's going to be an hour until you get to the next place or you get home by the time you shower or whatever you're doing, then we probably need to pack something and have something on hand that we can go to and grab.
Okay, so it is advisable for someone to have something like a little protein drink and then with, some carbs, and then later on they get a bigger meal as their refuel.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. And you got to plan these things, right? Because like if we know, we can always like, if we know what our day looks like, then we could plan around that. If we don't, then we need contingency plans. So this means maybe just having something in your car, having something in your bag, so that when those times come up where things didn't go to plan, you already have, you've already planned for not having a plan.
Yeah. No, for sure. That's 100% prep it all the way and just make it easier on the athlete. I guess another question I have in regards to you talking about planning ahead, what are some go-tos? You mentioned some go-tos like prime, fueling ones before basketball training. What are some key things that you're like, these are like top 5, not necessarily meals, but like food items that every basketball player should eat or that you would encourage it? Is there a list that you have or something you're like, hey, you guys got to get this, I'm just throwing some, and sweet potatoes, whatever, is there a top 5 things that you recommend for athletes?
Yeah. Okay. Let's go through this. So I would say salmon is in there. So we want fatty fish, omega-3s. We can get omega-3s from different things, but the omega-3s that help the most with like brain function as well as like inflammation is going to be from fish sources. So like salmon, if you like that, have it a few times a week. Next, I would probably say something in the nuts and seeds family. People don't get enough like magnesium and zinc. Both of those are important for testosterone, but also for recovery, healing, muscle function, all that sort of stuff. So nuts and seeds would be in there. Berries are an easy, like they've got carbs in it, but they've also got a good amount of fiber. And they're usually easy to throw in things or top on things. So don't overlook berries, especially if we're like not a veggie eater, which unfortunately a lot of my folks are not great veggie eaters. Those would be up there. And then, another, whether if you don't like salmon, then it would be like, what protein source do we like? So, chicken or a red meat's even fine. Some people will be like adverse to having too much red meat. Unless we have like family history or some issues like that, we can have it within moderation. I'd even argue for like female athletes, super important for iron. And then the last one, I would say like dairy. Dairy in general, that category is great. We get bone building nutrients in there. Up until your early 20s is like prime time for building bone density and bone health. So we want to do that and fortify that as much as we can. There's been a lot of like controversy around dairy over the years, and I think a lot of people have pulled it back in their diet, and unfortunately I think that we do see the impacts of that when it comes to bone health, but also dairy foods help with, they have 2 types of protein. We've got a whey, which is like a fast digesting absorbing protein, and then casein protein in any dairy food. So I like it before bed, so that we get some additional support with that casein, that overnight repair, slower digesting protein. So I would say dairy is definitely in there as well.
No, awesome. That was a good top 5 list.
think so.
I guess, yeah. And then just kind of going back on, you said like the overnight protein, with the protein, let's say if they can't fuel, this just kind of came up, just to kind of think of what questions people would ask, is let's say they can't fuel in the morning, if they have a bigger meal at night, or they have a different source of protein with carbs, would that still count as fueling if they eat it right before going to bed, and then the next morning, first thing they do, they wake up, they don't have time for the breakfast, it just goes straight to training? Does that count as fueling, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I had this question earlier today too, like what if I just don't eat breakfast? Like, is 2 meals a day okay? And I can work with that. We definitely need some snacks, but then we need to look at, it's not 2 regular meals that you would have if you had 3, it's 2 larger meals to make up for, what we didn't have. There used to be like, and there's still kind of rumors going around, myths going around, that like you can only digest like 20 or to maybe 40 grams of protein in a sitting. And there's research to show that they've tested like 100 grams of protein in one sitting and saw that that was just as usable. So, I could argue that we could have 1 or 2 large meals in a day and get it all in, but we have to be really intentional. And if you're not someone with a big appetite, and that's the reason why you're only having 1 meal, likely we're not gonna hit all of our needs. But like for me, I'm kind of a snacky person, so I might have a meal that looks more like some snacks kind of put together with the right combination of things, then it looks like a full meal. But to your point, like if you're not going to fuel early in the morning and then you have an early morning training, then that dinner and then even like snack after dinner is going to be even more critical, because overnight you do go through a fast and your body does a lot of repair overnight. You have a lot of growth hormone peaking overnight, so that nighttime is super critical, that we're getting good quality sleep, but also we're using some calories. So we're waking up in the day not with a full tank of gas. Even if we ate a bunch before bed, we're somewhat depleted already. So that's where that snack comes in. But yeah, we can make it work with any day. I think you just have to be intentional about, hey, if I'm eating less here, or if I'm skipping a meal here, I need to make it up somewhere else.
No, for sure. And then going with the snacks, what are your thoughts on like supplements? I know it's not in the same, but it's in the same kind of realm, but supplements, I bet all the athletes come in and ask you with different questions. What are your general thoughts on supplements, and should people take supplements?
Yeah, I mean, I have like a very short list of supplements that I'm like, these are great, let's add these in. I always start with, foundationally, we need a good diet in place. Like, even if you're taking the best supplements in the world, you're paying buku bucks for them, if you're not like eating enough of the right things at the right time, they're not gonna make as big of an impact as just doing that would do. If you're not sleeping well, you could probably benefit and get more out of just sleeping versus having supplements. But creatine is a big one that I'm really stand behind. Creatine monohydrate, it's been around, been tested for forever. We make it in our bodies. We get it from food. We just don't make enough or eat enough to really get the full benefits of it. Helps with muscle growth and muscle maintenance. But then for like basketball, it helps with explosive movements. So sprints, jumps, Olympic lifts. It helps with all of those sorts of things. And then also some really great research around brain health and like depression and mood and sleep deprivation and different amounts for those, but I'm a big fan of that. Always want to make sure it's third-party tested for athletes. The supplement industry is not well regulated. So I look for something that has NSF certified for sport or Informed Sport logos on the labels. You're not going to necessarily find these at all your stores. If you're like at a Walmart, there's going to be some, but there might not be, not every product is going to be appropriately tested. And that's very important because we have a lot of supplement contamination issues where you could unknowingly take a product that causes you to fail your analysis. So not great. So creatine is up there with that disclaimer. A fish oil, like an omega-3, I would say is up there as well. Most people are not eating enough fish, and there's a lot of benefits there for that. A multivitamin, if we're not a good like fruit veggie eater, or if we're skipping things, I think a good multivitamin is not a bad thing to throw in there. Magnesium is big right now. I think magnesium is great, especially with like sleep and that sort of thing. Magnesium glycinate is the form, or chelate is the form that we're looking for, as opposed to like citrate, which is like the one that makes you go to the bathroom. So those are the ones we want. So those would be like, I think, what maybe my top ones. And then maybe like a good protein powder too, if you feel like you might have days where you're not able to eat. I know when it gets hot, like I don't always feel like having a big meal. And so that might be a place where like I might have a protein shake or mix a little extra protein powder into like a Greek yogurt so that I can get in more protein and not necessarily eat a big chicken breast.
Yeah. Awesome. That's a good list. Yeah. Cause I mean, I've seen all the crazy research. I feel like creatine is going to be the new trending supplement. There's so much stuff coming out, and it's like,
I hope so. And it could use a glow up, to be honest.
Yeah, exactly. I guess going with the protein, I didn't ask you this earlier, but what's kind of like your stance on how much protein should basketball athletes, or just athletes in general, should have? Do you go with the 1 gram per kilogram or per pound? Like
Yeah, so I'm closer. The standard measurement, I would say, is like they'll say for most humans 0.8 grams per kilogram. So if you hear people that are like the police in the comments about, no, it's it is gram per kilogram, but my recommendations tend to be closer to 1 gram per pound. They're more like 2 grams per kilogram, or more, or 2.2. For strength and power, it's technically like 1.6 to 1.9 grams per kilogram. But we're close enough to that 1 gram per pound. And especially if you're trying to put on muscle, if you're someone who is doing a lot of hard training, if you're someone who is like trying to change your body composition and you're dieting, or, cutting back or anything, like those would be all, or coming back from an injury, those would be all reasons why I would like to see closer to the 1 gram per pound.
Awesome. And then another question on protein, especially with this off season, and you mentioned this earlier, a lot of people are trying to make some body recompositions, during this summer, which is a great time. What are some tips you recommend for them, for people that are trying to, increase their weight or decrease their weight? What are some general tips you would recommend for these athletes?
Yeah, so I'll start with decrease. If you're you shouldn't be miserable. You shouldn't be like starving and hungry and like feeling like crap all the time. If you are, you're not doing it right. And you should probably get some support on it. I know that I like, even working with pro hoopers, when they needed to make weight, they just like stopped eating, and that's like very counterproductive. So that's not what we should do. But we should modify like our plate portions. So go higher protein, go higher on that vegetable front, and go a little bit dial back a little bit on your carbohydrates. I still want to see them on every plate. Like I don't ever want to see no carbohydrates on a basketball player's plate. We just might be looking at, cutting back where we can, fueling around training, and then maybe in the meals that are outside of training, maybe those are places where we can cut back a little bit. But again, we shouldn't be miserable. Pay attention to like sauces and like creamy things, like all of dressings, even all of those things can add a lot of calories. Drinks, beverages with calories in it. I personally, especially if I'm like trying to cut back on calories, I want to eat as much as possible still. So I'd rather get it in food versus like a dressing and a drink. But if that's important to you, you just got to figure out how that works. And I would say like eating every 4 hours is still a goal. We still want the metabolism moving. If we're trying to gain weight, we want to be eating like every 2 to 3 hours, whether that's like not necessarily a meal, but a snack. And then I look for people that especially that struggle with just like increasing their portions because of appetite, of what can we add to the meals we already have instead of like adding a whole nother meal or something. Like, can we add a calorie containing beverage? Can we add some chocolate milk to the side of it? Can we add a sauce? Can we add some avocado? Can we add some nuts and seeds? A peanut butter and jelly sandwich? Can we plug that in somewhere in our day? So there's little ways where we can like add 400 or 500 calories to the day pretty easily without it being like I'm stuffed all the time, I can't move.
No, that's awesome. And I guess my last question in this realm is, what about following injuries? Since we see a lot of people, following like, let's say an ACL injury, which I think nutrition is huge, especially with all that muscle loss. What are some tips you recommend with that? Let's say coming after, let's say ACL surgery, that's one of the most common ones. They really need to take a really closer look at the nutrition. What are tips you give these athletes recovering from this injury?
Yeah, so protein's critical. We need to have protein high. Collagen, there's mixed studies on, but I think it is more likely to help than it is likely to hurt. It might be some just throwing things at it. Collagen is important. Vitamin C is necessary for collagen synthesis though, so we want to have those together. Omega-3s, control, once some inflammation's protective, we don't want inflammation to be out of control though, so omega-3s can help with there. Tart cherry juice also can help with inflammation and soreness, so that I would add that in there as well. Those would be the main ones though, is just like, making sure we're keeping protein high, making sure that, a lot of the mindset is I'm not training while I'm injured, so I need to cut back and not eat as much or I'm going to gain weight. I think we just have to be really mindful about how much we're cutting back. Again, if we're using less energy and carbs provide us energy, maybe we need less carbs, or maybe we switch from like fast carbs, simple sugars to like whole grains or things with more fiber in them in order to like replace those, and then keeping protein high. And then fruits and veggies, like all of those like micronutrients, vitamins and minerals, we don't always like see them and feel them working, but they do play a really important role in our recovery response.
Awesome. No, that was great information there all around. And quick thing, is USC still big on cherry bundies, or?
Yeah, we love it. We love it.
Because you said tart cherry. I was like making sure if USC still big on that. So yeah, no, this is some great information. Where can they reach you, Jess, in case people want to work with you or have questions? Where can they ask you if they have any questions or anything like that?
For sure. I'm Jessica the Sports RD for registered dietitian. So Jessica the Sports RD on Instagram and TikTok, and then website jessicathesportsrd.com, email jessicathesportsrd@gmail.com. So thank you for you.
Awesome, Jess. Well, thanks for coming on. You had some great information. I think a lot of basketball players are going to learn from this. And thanks for coming on.
Sweet. Thanks for having me.